Howdy! Today we are going to talk about tables and figures and how to use them correctly in APA format. When using tables in APA format, it's important to note what information is appropriate to go into a table. If the information can go into more than 2 columns, then it's appropriate to use a table. However, if the data can be put into less than 2 columns, it should be put into the body of the text. Figures, like graphs, such as a bar graph or a line graph, charts, like a pie chart, and pictures and drawings, things that you produce or find on the internet, would fall into the category of figures. And that's what we'll be talking about during this presentation: tables and figures in APA format. When using tables, you can present a large amount of information efficiently and obviously. It's important to make sure when you use a table that you talk about the information in the table also in the body of the text. You want to have a cohesiveness between the information you're presenting in the writing and the information that is within the table. You also want to make sure that the tables are organized in a logical way within the paper. You don't want information in the table to be out of context, considering what the next table would represent. As well, you want the information within the table to be ordered logically. You would put males and females next to each other, or data taken before an experiment and after an experiment next to each other. When using tables within your paper, you again want to make sure that you limit the information to what is essential. You should put a title above the table that's brief but explains what is within the table. You don't want something too long, just a quick snippet of what you're trying to represent. You should also number each of the tables in order. For example, your first table would have a 1 by it, your second table would have a 2, your third table would have a 3, and so on. You don't want to put, for example, a table that has 6A, 6B, 6C. This is inappropriate, and you should put all of this information into one table. Within the table itself, you want to make sure that if you're using numbers, you use the same amount of decimal places in each of the numbers. If you're recording weight, you don't want to say 106.5 and then have the next line say 123.76. You want to make sure that you either have 1 or 2 decimal places across the board. When using tables in grant writing, the main purpose is going to be communication. You want to explain the purpose of your grant proposal and help your grant reader to understand what you are talking about. Using a table is a creative way to help get across your message and what you want and how you predict it to become successful. Sometimes words can be confusing, so having access to a table can allow others to actually see and understand what you are talking about. The second use would be calculation. Tables are a great way to help show statistics, values, and numbers for a large set of data. Having a table can help provide evidence and can back up your grant proposal. Breaking up some of the text is also a helpful way to help the reader understand what you are talking about. Think of the phrase, "A picture is worth 1,000 words." Organization is the third use. Tables can help attract attention and break up the text so that the reader isn't just reading chunks of words, but gets to see something a little bit different. Having a table is a great way to help drive home a point with a target population. This can also help present large amounts of information efficiently. Like we talked about before, figures can be anything that is a graph, a chart, a map, a drawing, or a photograph. You want to make sure that when you use these within your paper that they're necessary and that they present what you are talking about. You want there to be a cohesiveness between the figure and what you're saying within the paper. You also want to make sure that when you're using graphs or data, that it's plotted correctly and that each graph has a similar formatting. A common theme that we have been talking about is making sure that the things you are putting in your paper are not too much or overbearing. This really applies to figures. You want to make sure that they are simple, clear, that they are continuous and represent what you're talking about within the paper, and that they add value. If the figure itself doesn't add any more understanding to the paper, it's probably not needed. When you are scaling a figure, you need to remember how important it is to the point that you are making. If it's just a little add-on to make sure that you clarify something, it might not need to be as big as a data table that's representing the data that you have been talking about the entire time in your paper and shows the graph over time of all your information. You want to make sure that it adds to the text and isn't directly copying it. As well, you want it to be obvious and information to be easy to understand. The differentiation between a graph and a chart would be using quantitative data that connects to each other. So for a graph, you want to have an independent and a dependent variable. For example, a graph could show the change in a person's weight over a period of 6 months. There will be an x-axis and a y-axis showing the connection between these 2 points. A chart would be information that goes into one full idea. So for example, a pie chart would show the proportion of workers that are in HR, sales, and in the warehouse in a business. When you're using these inside of your paper, you want to make sure that the text in them is large and able to be read. You can do this by using a simple font and use the same font throughout your paper. You want each of the graphs and charts to look cohesive within the entire thing. Limit shading so that things are easy to read and that there is an obvious difference between each part of the bar graph or the pie chart. You want it to be obvious the difference between each of the proportions or each of the bars. However, you don't want it to be too busy that it's distracting towards the entire portion of the paper. When using pictures and drawings, you want to make sure that they are high-resolution images. This is because they will look more professional, and if things are reproduced too many times, it can also dull the actual picture or the details within it. You also want to crop out any unneeded details. If there is a title, then you want to crop that out because you will be putting in your own information at the bottom. You also want to make sure that you have permission from the photographer or the artist. You will also be adding citations at the bottom if you are reproducing this within your paper. You want to make sure that you indicate any alterations that you made. That way the person reading gets a full idea of what you are trying to put forth with that picture and what the picture was before. When using captions, you want them to be brief and descriptive. You should start out your caption in italic letters saying figure and then the number of the figure within your paper. The first figure in your paper should be figure 1, the second one should be figure 2, the third figure 3, and so on. After you've typed figure 1, or the number that you're using in italics, there should be a period, and then an explanation, a short, brief tidbit about what the figure is. If you've gotten this figure from somewhere else off the internet, there should also be a citation. Units of measurement should be mentioned, as well as an explanation of any symbols and abbreviations. This will make sure the person reading and looking at the figure knows what you're trying to say in the context that you are saying it. So, for example, if the measurement was in tens of thousands of people, that's very important, as opposed to the measurement being one person. Using figures within grant writing can help with understanding. It can help explain the data. Figures can be used to effectively explain complex calculations and show the sampling and flow of subjects throughout the experiment or clinical trials. They can also be used to predict and show errors, precision, and results. They can show details about smaller data sets that a table cannot. It also adds to variety. Graphs usually explain relationships between X and Y sets or values of data. Maps can explain spatial information, while photographs can contain a direct representation of the information. There are many variations and versions of each of these that you can use throughout the paper. You can also set the tone. This can help readers understand the information by matching up the text with a visual. This can give a competitive edge over other proposals being looked at. This will provide an alternative way for the data to be presented and remembered. A picture might be remembered more than just a sentence within the paper. As an overview, you want to make sure that the tables you are putting into your paper are limited to only the information that can be fit into more than 2 columns and the information that's very important to make the point that you are putting forth. You want to number them in the order that they come during your paper. The first one would be Table 1, the second Table 2, and so forth. You also want to make sure that there is a title, but that it is brief. There's no need to explain what is entirely going on, just a little note about what they are going to read. When using figures, you want to make sure that they are large enough to be read, but not too large that they take up space and become distracting. You want to make sure that only the essential information is included in those figures. Again, so it's not too distracting and it's to the point. You want to make sure that that figure also relates directly to what you're saying in the text and supplements and maybe gives another visual or another way of looking at the point that you are making. If you need more information on using tables and figures in APA format, visit the Purdue OWL website and their Tables and Figures tabs, or you can look through the APA Style book.